that you work for Modern Draught. This is Shane McConnell. I met you over at Mystic. I think you were working there at the time, maybe 4, 5, 6, 8 years ago. I don't know.
I think it's like, 5 years ago.
5 years ago, yep. And what were you doing there?
Just running the tap room.
Okay.
That was about it. Just working in the tap room full time, and then also I worked at a bottle shop, Ball Square Fine Wines at the same time. I was doing 2 full-time jobs just to get into the beer scene over here, because I had moved from California where I'd like established roots, but when you move across the country, those roots don't mean shit.
Yeah.
So.
Nice. That kegerator system, I don't know if you remember it, but I think they sold it to a company in Gloucester called Agape or something like that. And then
the one from Mystic?
Yeah. So
I hope they did not pay much for that.
And then I was over at Backbeat Brewing, who was going to host our NHC first round competition. Mm-hmm. And was walking through there, and all of a sudden I recognize that tap system. So now it's over at Backbeat.
That's funny.
Yeah, just sitting empty right now, but
yeah,
it's gotten around. So
I mean, I don't know, it's kind of cool. Like, I mean, it is a part of history, again, the beer history. So
yeah, for sure. So you want to give us a little bit more background, how you got, maybe what you moved on after Mystic, and then how you ended up at Modern Draught?
Yeah, so I was at Mystic for probably 8 months or so. When I first moved to Massachusetts, my idea was actually to start a line cleaning company, because I used to clean the lines at the bar that I worked at back home. And so the idea was, when I came out here, that I was actually going to just open a line cleaning company. Just not like a company, I guess. It was just like a sole proprietorship, just be myself, go around, clean lines. And but I drove across country and spent all the money that I had saved up, because it's like, I'm only driving across country one time, so let's kind of do this. And so I spent my money, and so I needed to kind of save up some money. And so, like I said, I was working at the bottle shop full time, working at Mystic full time, just trying to get kind of feel for the environment out here. And I became friends with Joe Connolly, who's now at Springdale, but before he was at Craft Brewers Guild, which was the distribution company that sold Mystic. So those guys would always come in for beers and stuff like that. And finally, I was just like, all right, I think I'm ready for this. Like, I asked Joe, like, what's the rules out here? Because the rules are different state by state on who can provide line cleaning and how it all works out. And he was just like, oh, he gave me some information, but he was just like, don't do anything on your own. There's actually these 2 guys that I'm meeting up at a bar tonight, and you should like come to the bar, and I'll introduce you to those guys. They're actually looking to hire their first employee. And so finished my shift at Mystic, and then went down to Brewers Fork and met up with them. There's a guy named Chris and Maddie. This was actually their first day off since they started the company, which at that time they were only a month old. And so met up with them. Kind of Joe he had to leave, so I had to introduce myself to them. He was just like, oh, look for the guy with a bunch of tattoos, and just like hit him up and just tell him my name, and you'll be square. And I was like, all right, cool. So I like go up, and this is funny. My first interview was with both the owners were totally drunk. So because like I said, it was their first day off since they started the company. So they were
Brewers Fork has a ton of beer, ton of great beers there. So
so kind of told them my history and stuff like that, and with line cleaning, and then working at Mystic, and all that stuff. And they're like, all right, cool. Like, let's schedule another interview when, you know, no one's drinking, and we'll do that. And I was like, all right, yeah, that sounds great. So we had a bunch of beers that night, and yeah, kind of started with them, you know, basically almost day one. You know, they'd only been a month old at that point with just a handful of accounts. So, you know, they weren't, you know, popping off or anything like that. And the company started off as purely cleaning, maintenance and stuff like that. We weren't even really doing service calls at that point, or we definitely weren't doing installs. It wasn't even in the business plan to do an install the first year of the company. So, you know, it was almost exclusively just line cleaning up in the beginning of the company.
All right, nice. And that was how long ago?
Well, so our first install was Notch Brewing. So that was, I mean, the company's been around for 4 years now. So yeah, I think Notch they opened up in the summer, I think. So I think the company opened in March. And yeah, basically took us, I don't know, we said that we weren't doing an install for an entire year before we like would try it, but we ended up doing it a little bit quicker just because Notch asked us to do it. But yeah, the company itself's been around for 4 years and been doing line cleaning for 4 years. But yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, Notch is a good one to get started. Did you design the whole system, soup to nuts? And
yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a collaboration between us and the brewers, just because we have wild dreams of what we want to do with the draft system, and people have budgets.
High-end dreams,
so, yeah. So we have like really cool ideas of what we can do, you know, and we can do anything as long as physics allows it. It's just whether or not you have the bank account, you know, funds set aside to kind of let us do that stuff. But so Notch was cool because they have the Lucre tower up front on the front bar, with the side pull Lucre taps. So that was pretty fun. You know, kind of on our first install, we have to deal with some like crazy Euro situations, and you know, that was a great experience. And you know, we've never had to take out an ad or anything or do any advertisement, just because, you know, with Notch kind of being our first install, it kind of snowballed naturally just because so many people respect Notch so much. So, you know, that kind of helped our install career kick off a hell of a lot faster than we anticipated.
very nice. Yeah, I can imagine. So yeah, let's see here. So yeah, if we the Notch system is pretty sweet. I'm sure Ross has questions on that, but might circle back.
I'm holding them right now, Doug. I'm holding them.
I just want to know what Chris Loring smells like.
That's great.
So I guess I have some questions lined up here for you. Let's give you a softball here. How often? Let's keep it at a homebrewer's mindset. How often should you clean your lines? If you have like a kegerator system set up with maybe 2 or 3 taps set up, yeah, I guess that's where we're at.
Yeah, so it kind of just depends on the materials and age. So Brewers Association says 2 weeks, no matter what, that's what it is. What we actually do for our regular maintenance for our draft accounts is we do it once a month. So the reasoning behind that is because our cleaning practices are a little bit different than most other line cleaners. So caustic, that's the chemical that we use whenever we do line cleaning. At 100 degrees, caustic has a 98% efficiency rating. At 40 degrees, caustic has a 3% efficiency rating. So it just plummets. So most line cleaners, or something that you guys don't have to really deal with on a homebrew level with like kegerators, is a glycol unit.
Right.
Which most, bars and stuff like that, they have these glycol units to keep the beer cold, going from the cooler to the faucet. So most line cleaning companies don't turn that unit off. So that unit is designed to cool the lines down. So when they clean the lines, they're actually only cleaning at a 3% efficiency rating. And that's even if they try to temper the system. So like when we do a clean, we turn off the unit. We run hot water through it first, then the hot chemical, and then we rinse, and then we pack with beer. Where a lot of people, they'll just go beer to chemical to beer, or beer to chemical to water to beer. So they're not tempering the system, and they're not turning off the glycol unit. So that's where the 2 weeks plays into. If your efficiencies aren't really high, then you need to do it all the time. Also, those standards in the BA, that was written when vinyl was the standard material for beer tubing, and brass was the standard for the metal.
Faucets, yeah.
Where we only install stainless steel, and we only use silicone-based tubing for like the jumpers and stuff like that. We don't install vinyl, period, yet. So when it comes to like our systems, just the hygiene level of them is so much higher that it allows us to make those trips less frequent. We have also like done swab testing and stuff like that, just to make sure that what we thought was true was actually true. So we actually teamed up with Alpha Chemical. So we actually helped create a caustic and acid cleaner with them. So they're like veracity line chemicals. We actually helped them make those. And with that, we did all of our tests, and we'd actually swab. So we'd swab it before and after the clean, and then we also did it with a brass faucet every 2 weeks, a brass faucet once a month, a stainless faucet every 2 weeks, a stainless faucet once a month. We did the couplers. We took the couplers off. We swabbed the inside of the tubing. So we did all kinds of testing just to see like what was actually like worth doing. Even at 2 weeks, old brass is not going to be hygienic. The metal's just too pitted, and it grows too fast. So even if you're performing a perfect clean every 2 weeks on super old brass components, their growth is happening faster than you're cleaning. Whereas like on stainless, we say we're maintenance. We're doing maintenance. We're not cleaning anything. We're not removing, soils. We just maintain a clean system, because the way we clean, stuff doesn't grow, So on a kegerator, you guys have it pretty easy. Whereas, if you do it right and you do it once a month, with the appropriate chemical dilutions and stuff like that, once a month should be plenty fine.
Okay. Pet peeve I have of mine that maybe isn't warranted, but if you ever go to a bar and somebody's filling up, you order a beer, they're filling up your beer, and you see them bring you, it's almost full, and they kind of have the foam come right up, and it kind of kisses the faucet, goes up and over the faucet, around the faucet, and then they take it down and they give it to you. Is that some BS, or is that fine?
No, I mean, that's fucking disgusting. Like, you should not be doing that. There are exceptions to that rule. With the Lucre faucets, those faucets are specifically designed to be broken down and cleaned every night.
Okay.
Those faucets also have a price point where no one's buying them unless they use them correctly. So you can almost guarantee if someone has a Lucre faucet, they also have the mind to take care of it properly. But yeah, if you're at a regular bar and the bartender dips the beer into
Like
the faucet,
Slagos or
anywhere. And, I mean, even nice places do it. It's more the bartender than the establishment, because the establishment isn't pouring the beer. But if the faucet goes into the beer, it's pretty gross. And depending on your mood, would warrant a, hey, how about I don't take that beer from you? Because I mean, if the lines were cleaned that morning, it's probably fine, unless they did that an hour ago, and then that way that beer is just kind of sitting inside the faucet,
on the outside of the faucet too.
yeah, it is disgusting. No matter how the frequency of the clean, if they stick the beer inside the faucet, it's disgusting.
All right. So next question. Best way to handle kegs of various carbonations. For example, how can you go from a 1.8 volume to a Weiss beer to a 3.5, more effervescent? I guess a mild would be the 1.8 volume. The Weiss beer would be the 3.5. And maybe Ross could ask that a little more succinctly if that was his question.
Yeah, so from a homebrewer scale, if I have like a low carb beer and a high carb beer, is there any way to really deal with that besides just extending the line length to deal with the pressure difference?
There's the major one is the faucet is going to help out the most. So there are different types of faucets that have compensators actually built into them. And that actually allows you to add restriction to the system without extending line to the system. That's another thing. Yeah, the gov rigs are pretty cool. But yeah, so like with the faucet, there's like different faucets have like different limitations of what they can do. So like I saw Doug on the like quick question sheet that you sent me. So like it starts with the Perlick 650. The Perlick 650 is like the low end of faucet compensation. The reason it is because the compensator is shaped kind of like a bullet. So it's like this, where it's just kind of like rounded on the edge, but it's like a big curve. And so what happens is when the beer travels through the lines and it hits that compensator, it's hitting like a big curve, and then it has to go around the entire curve before it goes through. So we've done some like kind of beer tests where we will start with a beer, we'll get a keg, and it's carved at 2.5, which is pretty standard for most beers. And we'll put that on there, and we'll start slowly carbonating that beer and seeing what we can do with it. So Perlick 650s, it stops at 2.7 volumes. Like once you get to 2.7, the pour is just going to be really gross. It's not going to look good. It's not going to present well. It's going to be slow as hell. So like on just like a regular standard system that's balanced properly, Perlick 650 is probably only good to 2.7. And even then, it's just the higher the carbonation, it's going to just tank your pour speed, and it's going to make your head look like trash. And so the next kind of step up from that is the original model is called a Celli. It's an Italian faucet, so Celli flow control. So those have a different shaped compensator. So it's kind of like a cone. Like it's shaped like a long cone. So it like this side's the faucet front, and then it cones out like that. So what happens is when the beer, it hits a much smaller surface versus the Perlick, it's a large surface that it hits all at once. Whereas with the Chelly or Micromatic has the Euro flow control. It's the same body type. So that has like a smaller surface and it kind of jets out. Those things are pretty awesome. Those can handle like up to like 3 volumes. Like that's kind of like its cutoff is like 3 volumes, which is incredibly high for beer. Like most beer is not carb that high. Most beer that, you know, bars are getting at least, you know. Obviously homebrewers, you guys have like a really interesting like beer life, because it can be whatever, you know. You can make your beer 4 volumes if you want, you know, like, so you have so much more control. Whereas a bar, they just get the keg. If the keg doesn't pour well, they just send it back, and like that's that. So with the Chelly style, you can go around like 3 volumes, maybe a little bit higher, and then kind of like the ultimate for compensation is it's called the Roto flow control. So this actually is discontinued, so you can't buy them anymore, unfortunately. They discontinued them like mid last year. Incredibly expensive faucets, incredibly expensive to maintain. The awesome thing about these faucets is they have like a little cam inside, and so the pour is amazing. So these are like, if you go to Notch, the back wall faucets, those are the Roto flow controls. Trying to think of like other bars that would have them. Trillium has a lot of them. These things, those can handle up to like 3.5, 3.7. You know, you can really, with those faucets, they can really handle the super high volume beers. And once again, the higher your volumes are, if you're not adding restriction into the system and you're just basing it off of the faucet, it's going to totally slow everything down. You know, as you start restricting the faucet, it's going to slow your pour down, you know, a lot, especially the higher the volumes are. But with these, like with the Rotos, you know, we can pour at Trillium Canton, we made a system that can pour beer at 54 degrees. Like you can have a 3 volume sour pouring at 54 degrees. Like as a draft system goes, that's crazy. Like Trillium is like one of the few breweries, like Canton specifically, that tap room has the ability to pour beer unlike most places you can go to. But that's kind of like the breakdown of like compensation throughout the different faucets. Like Perlick is awesome because it's like super cheap. It's really easy to get a hold of. They're really hygienic, but the volumes that they can handle is relatively low. And then the step up, you know, it's a little bit more expensive, a little bit less hygienic, just because it's not a forward sealing faucet, it's a rear sealing faucet. So it has the vent and the piston. Those can get dirty a lot quicker than a Perlick would. And then you have kind of like that top of the line where it's the Roto. It's a cam, so it doesn't have, it's more of like a forward sealing faucet, because it doesn't have the piston or anything like that. It doesn't have a vent hole or anything. So super hygienic, air never enters the faucet at all. But because of the compensator design, it allows it to pour really high volume beer at a relatively good like flow rate.
Quick question on that. If you're not concerned about the flow rate, is there an option for, since they're expensive and a pain to maintain and no longer available, is there an option to homebrewers if we wanted to get a faucet that could pour like a 3.5, 3.7 beer or something like that? Don't care if it takes me 3 minutes to pour a beer, but I could go from a 1.8 volume to 3.5 volume. Is there a tap that could handle that?
It would be really hard to, with just the lack of restriction in your system. That would be, so it's like, you know, the amount of space allotted to you is not very much. Whereas like I can get away with a lot of stuff on a draft system, like on a long draw system, because, you know, like I could have 100-foot run to make up my restriction, whereas you only have a kegerator, you know? So it's like, and without just like coiling a bunch of hose inside your kegerator, it's like hard to just make up that restriction. So even with the roto, you can really only gain about like 10 pounds of restriction in the faucet. So if you're trying to go like one after the other, like super low to super high immediately without modifying anything, like it's gonna be really tough. And like technically, like if you have like a Perlick that's like a 650 that's barely has the restrictor open just enough for like it to leak, technically it could pour it, you know, there's probably going to be a bunch of waste, but you know, you could get the liquid out of the keg that way. But yeah, I would definitely go with like the Micromatic Euroflow control, or Micromatic just came out with this thing called the Debbie Tap, where it's basically the second version of the Roto flow control. The thing is, it weighs like 2 pounds, like it's super fucking heavy, because it's the downfall of the Roto was the cam was made out of like a polymer, so it would crack over time. So like every like 6 months to a year, the cam would actually physically crack, and it would start growing stuff from the inside.
Mushrooms?
And pretty close. It's really gross. We definitely have pictures of it. But so it started growing stuff, and those cams are like $20 each to replace. So you're talking about a faucet that from the get-go costs $140, and then every 6 months to a year you have to spend another $20 just so it doesn't have a bunch of shit growing on the inside. So what they did is they made a new faucet that's called the Debbie Tap, and it's basically the same design, but the cam's made out of stainless steel. Because the cam's made out of stainless steel, it's a lot bigger, because they couldn't machine it, you know, really small. And so that faucet is just massive. It's huge, it's heavy. Like if you just have like a 3-inch column tower sitting on top of the kegerator, and you have the Debbie Tap on there, like if you're not through bolting your column tower to your kegerator, you could like rip the tower off the top. Like it's just so heavy, and like, yeah, you would have so much leverage where you could probably literally rip the tower off your fucking kegerator.
Oh, well worth the money.
Yeah, but it does compensation really well.
Fair enough. So what I'm hearing is that the high carbonation beers is just a hard time to deal with in an average homebrew setup, right? It's just gonna be tough.
Yeah,
either a shit ton of coiled tubing, or I have to bolt some shit to the wall so I don't tear stuff off.
Well, I mean, so there's another way you can do this. Perlick, when someone buys the draft system, most of the time they actually don't buy it from a draft installer. They buy it from either Perlick or Micromatic. And so a Perlick kit, so like our company is certified by Perlick and Micromatic to install Perlick and Micromatic systems. So there's like a cheat code, which for regular drafts, this is great because I don't get to like think about draft beer in a really tiny sense most of the times. So this actually probably works great for you guys. They make these little beads that you put inside the tubing. They're like little restrictor beads. So you can create a ton of restriction in a very little amount of space. Because I mean, the beads are like literally like that big, and each bead is 2 pounds of restriction. So if you need to ramp up restriction, but yeah, it's obviously, you know, in a kegerator, it's awesome because it's all accessible. You know, it's all right there. You can just cut it out, pull it out. You know, it's not a big deal. You know, for me, most of the time, I think like we don't install restrictor kits, period, the end, because the way people are making beer nowadays, there's too much stuff in the beer, so it can clog. So that's like the downfall of the restrictor kit, is that it makes up restriction and a very tiny amount of space, but there's something physically in the tubing. So if your beer is not really refined, and has a lot of turbidity, it could actually clog the line, which in that case you'd have to back flush the line to get that stuff out. So we don't install that stuff in draft systems, just because of all like the new brewers that are like, we'll make a crazy beer, filled with all kinds of food and such, and they just throw whatever in there and they keg it, without any filtration or anything like that. And then someone gets a keg full of slime and they tap the keg and now the whole system's messed up. And that can cost someone hundreds of dollars to fix. Like, I mean, worst case, it could be thousands of dollars to fix if it really mess it up. So we shy away from doing that stuff. But for you guys, this would actually be a super easy way to build a ton of restriction in a very small amount of space. You just have to like literally add like this much, like it's just a 1/4 inch tube that has a clamp on either side, and a splicer on either side. And you just splice that in, and then you have all your restriction in there, and you could have 100 pounds of restriction in the line just like that, and that would allow you to pour high volume beer in a super small amount of space.
That's awesome. Thanks, man. And I'll stop cannibalizing this entire presentation. Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
I feel like high carbonation is like a huge problem that a lot of people have to face. And it's, I don't know. I think we love messing with high carb stuff. So, I love it.
Yeah, I thought it was a good question because from Phil gave us the idea. We brewed like a hard seltzer just for the hell of it and have it jacked up at 50 psi, and I'm like, I can't pour this shit at all.
Yeah. Because like soda and stuff like that, that's at 4 volumes. Like
right.
Typically, like most sodas are at 4 volumes. So yeah, that would be a nightmare on most draft systems.
Add the beads.
Yeah, we can, you could probably just find them online, but if not, you could just hit us up. We have like hundreds of these packs because they come with Perlix systems. We just don't install them. So we just have them.
Very nice. And then I guess the next question is, somebody's asking what type of tubing, and I think you answered that already. Did you say vinyl is the only way to go? And is there any other?
No, vinyl's the opposite. Yeah,
okay.
Vinyl's terrible. Yeah, so vinyl, the shelf life on vinyl is 2 years. That's with regular maintenance. So we use stuff called EJ Barrier or Elton James. That stuff has a 10-year lifespan. Much more sanitary. So they don't say that it's made out of silicone, but they say it's silicone-like. So we just, for sales terms, we just say silicone-based tubing. But basically it's completely smooth on the inside, whereas vinyl is super porous. Therefore, it can grow microbes incredibly fast. So yeah, the trick is because it is so smooth, it has less restriction than vinyl does. So that's where it can be kind of tricky in a kegerator setting because, typically we only have to use it to like, on a long draw draft system, you have like the main system and then it goes through some equipment and then it goes into a jumper. That jumper doesn't have any restriction. We're not using the jumper to restrict the system. So, we can have like 5/16 tubing or 3/8 tubing. But it's important to have that be super hygienic, where typically most other installers, their jumper is in vinyl. Then the place doesn't get cleaned, it's not maintained very well. And that stuff gets super opaque. You can see it. Like, it's crazy what bars get away with. Like, the jumpers in most bars look like total garbage. And it's insane. Like, you can see how dirty it is, like just by looking at it. But yeah, so like Elton James, that's the stuff that we use. Yeah, that's like the high end kind of tubing. But like I said, it does have less restriction than vinyl does. So if you guys are using it in the kegerator, if you typically need like 6 or 7 feet, you might need 7 or 8 feet just to give you the proper restriction you need.
Yeah, I think on a homebrew level, they sell it to us as silver lined tubing.
So that stuff's actually a little bit different. So
okay,
that stuff actually doesn't need to be cleaned, which is something I find problem with. But it's got like, it's silver ion is the full length. So there's actually stuff inside that it only is supposed to work for like, I think it's like 100 pours or something like that. But eventually the chemical on the inside that keeps it clean goes away. And then at that point, you're supposed to replace the tubing. We don't install it, so I don't really know, the full workings of it. But yeah, if you look up like it's like silver ion EJ barrier or something like that. It's like a little bit more expensive. But yeah, they sell it as like hey, don't clean your draft system, just replace it. Like, it doesn't cost that much. So
especially if it lasts 100 pours, I mean, that's if you never have to clean your lines, and we're not doing massive pours out of it.
yeah. I mean, was that 2 kegs for you guys? I mean, each corny keg, if you have a 5 gallon, should do about like 60 something pours.
Yeah, so if you have that, and maybe you don't know this because you don't install it, but if you have that, like, do you know after that, advertised number of pours, does it then act like the stuff that you use? Does it act like vinyl stuff? Do you have any ideas of like how you should clean it? I mean, I clean my lines anyway, but
yeah, I mean, it would just revert into the base material is the same. It's still that like silicone based line. So you're totally fine. It doesn't like tank. And like vinyl is garbage if it's not maintained. If you maintain perfectly, vinyl, it's less than ideal, and you definitely need to replace it every 2 years. But if you have vinyl in the system and you maintain properly, like, there's nothing wrong with it. We shout at the tops of the mountain, like no more vinyl, no more stainless. But that's because restaurants do not replace things unless they completely break. So that's why we say those things. But at a homebrew level, you guys take care of your shit a lot better than most restaurants do. So if you're maintaining properly, vinyl isn't.
That is a terrifying thought right there.
Yeah, no, draft beer is fucking terrifying. Like, it really is. If so we have like an Instagram for Modern Draft, and we do a thing called Sunday Funk Day.
Oh, I see.
And yeah, and we post pictures of all the nasty shit that we find. And yeah, draft beer is terrifying.
That was one of my questions for Sunday Funk Day. Do you find that like your customers are like, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you posting our nasty shit? Like, I know you don't post where it came from, but I would have to think that one of your customers would put 2 and 2 together. Have they ever like asked you to like take it down?
So we've never had a customer ask us to take something down besides one place, but it was a positive thing. Like, they just don't allow people to use them as advertisement. So we had to take that post down. But all the Sunday Funk Day stuff, we tell our techs, like, hey, we need these pictures. We love these pictures. Like, this, really gets us a lot of business. Take these pictures, but the one stipulation is when you take this picture, it cannot be, you cannot find out who this place is by looking at the pictures. So like, if a place has a one-of-a-kind bar top, that bar top cannot be in the picture. If they have special stools that like are just like, everyone knows those stools are from this bar, that can't be in there. Like, we make sure that when we take those pictures that it's completely, this could be anywhere, and like, it's funny because a lot of people are like, oh, it's all the dive bars. We don't actually take care of a lot of dive bars. Most of our places are really nice places. So like when people are like, oh yeah, I'm going to a really nice restaurant, it's like a lot of really nice restaurants don't give a shit about beer. Like they give a shit about wine and cocktails and food. And then it kind of stops at beer for most of them, unless you're going to a beer centric nice bar, then they're probably going to pay a little attention to that. But yeah, even those places, they were our customer for a first time at one point, like.
Yeah.
So the moral of the story is never order drafts at nice restaurants?
No, not necessarily. Just follow us and see where we clean and go to those nice places.
So that kind of gets us right into this question. What's a giveaway that a bar or brewery needs to clean their lines, and how do you tell them?
This is something that I've like really thought about a lot, just because when a customer tells a bartender like, hey, like I know what this beer tastes like, and this is not what that beer tastes like, and it's just like it's really hard because it's like, do you go like, I'm a certified Cicerone level 2, I'm an advanced Cicerone, and your lines are dirty, and I know this off flavor, this off flavor, and this off flavor. And you could totally be right. But then it's like the bartender's like too deep at the bar, busting their ass. And it's not their fault that the draft system's not maintained. And, are they going to remember to tell their manager, like, hey, when was the last time we had our lines cleaned? Who cleans our lines? How did they clean them? Like the bars trust when they're paying for a service, they trust that the person's doing it and that they're doing it right. It's not the bar's fault most of the time when the system is neglected. They pay someone to clean it. It's whether or not the person cleaning it actually cleans it, and it's kind of hard for them to take notice. But I mean, there's things that you can definitely see, like this kind of pertains to if the taps are on the back bar, but like if you can see like where the piston is on a rear ceiling faucet, if that's all gunked up, that's clearly dirty. Sometimes you can see like in the bottom of the faucet, and that's a big spot for stuff to grow,
Like bugs
just
hanging?
because like on the inside of a faucet, like if you could look right in the spout, sometimes if you're sitting on the bar and the tower's kind of right in front of you, it's like the worst spot to sit for most people, but you can kind of like pick under and you can see up there, like that's a big growth spot, like it's I mean, you can honestly just be straight up like, yo, there's these off flavors in your beer, like I know your system's dirty, you should follow up with your technicians. It's just telling a bartender that, telling a manager that, it's like, are they actually going to be able to follow through? Because you're talking to them, you're not super busy, but they are, like they're doing it, they're doing their job. And most, people in the hospitality industry, their life is chaos from like 5 p.m. to close. Like, like it's just pure chaos. So you tell them something, they'll probably do their best to try to notate it, but if they don't, it's definitely not their fault. Like they're in the weeds, like for sure. So, keeping that in mind. And I've talked to like brewers where it's like, okay, so you go into an account, exactly what your beer tastes like. You fucking made it. Like, what this thing tastes like. How do you tell someone that their system's dirty when it is? And a lot of them are like, I can't. They're my customer. They buy my product. If I tell them that, hey, your shit's dirty, then they stop buying my product. And so it's a really weird world. I don't know. Beer is like, it's like so political.
Call them back at 3 p.m. someday.
Yeah, no, 2:00. It's actually 2:00. Like if you ever want a job at a bar or restaurant, you go in at 2:00. That's when you go in to talk to a manager.
This is a oh, sorry.
Oh no, go.
Maybe a stupid question, but does every single like restaurant or bar have a service or a company like yours that comes in and cleans the lines? Do some people do it themselves? Like just like a whole side of the business outside of you guys, where I see it like all these craft beer places, but just is there a bunch of other companies out there that do this as well?
So in Massachusetts, you guys are all in Massachusetts, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Massachusetts, there's us. There's Lennox Martell, who's the big company. Lennox Martell does about like 90% of all the restaurants in the Massachusetts area. Then there's Clean Beer, and GNR is another company. But yeah, it's basically 4 of us that do everything. Like I think we have almost 400 accounts, with, I'd say probably half of those are just offices. They're not even restaurants. They're just like tech offices that have kegerators that we clean. Yeah, that's yeah. Actually, tech offices are a huge money driver for us because we have a minimum to go out, and obviously cleaning a kegerator doesn't take a whole lot versus what we're used to. So because we have the minimum, it could be an 8-tap remote system or 1-tap kegerator. We make the same amount of money.
Oh, nice.
Obviously the profits are a lot higher for us to do those kegerators, but yeah. We do so many offices. It's like
that's crazy. Yeah, I didn't know that. I thought that's pretty.
Yeah,
cool.
like Wayfair, the furniture company.
Yeah.
They're based, or like they have a huge headquarters in Boston.
Yeah.
They go through like 30 or 40 kegs a week.
What?
30 or 40.
Is it just beer
kegs,
kegs, or they do coffee kegs too? Because I know some people do.
No, that's just the beer and cider.
What?
Yeah, they go through more than fucking than most bars do. It's like
that's
insane.
insane.
I mean, they have like 5,000 employees or something, so it's like it makes sense.
I just joined a company that has a coffee keg, and I said, "Hey, can I bring in my beer keg?" And they're like, "Well, you're gonna have to change out the lines." And I was like, "I'll just bring in my own keg and my own CO2 tank, and we'll do like a paydick tap."
There you go.
Okay. I guess we'll get close to the end here. Appreciate your time. I got a question for Phil, though. Phil's going to be wanting to know, is there any tap systems or tap faucets that don't let oxygen back up into the waiting beer, or are they all kind of valuable to that?
So that's the big difference between a forward sealing or rear sealing faucet. So if it's a rear sealing faucet, it has a vent on the front. That vent allows for a beautiful pouring beer, but it's a vent. It lets air into the faucet. So any standard faucet, if it says standard, all the standards are like that. All the Euro flow control, Chelly, those all have vents. Those are all rear sealing faucets. They all let air into them. The Perlix, the rear sealing, or you sent me it's the inner tap or something like that.
Yep.
It's funny. We've seen them, but we've never actually like dealt with them or anything like that. And once again, super awesome thing for homebrewers. Like, it's like really cool that you can have a nitro faucet and then it goes into just back to a regular faucet. And I was actually, for like the last hour, I was like just like on their website taking a look at all of it. The Pluto gun is awesome. I'm buying one. Like, I'm getting a Pluto gun. I think it's hilarious.
Yeah, but, for the inner tap.
Yeah, like it's just awesome. I don't know. I want a beer gun. Why not? Like, but yeah, like any of the forward sealing faucets, those aren't going to let beer or air past the nozzle. Everything, no matter what, there's always air is going to go into the nozzle of a faucet. There's no seal that's going to stop that. So every single faucet does that. But like the Lucre taps or the Rotos, like those all have like a ball valve that stops it from going into the faucet. So those are fine as well. But yeah, I mean, obviously air getting into the faucet is a big deal and a big problem, but that mostly is just on the rear sealing faucets. All the other faucets are fine.
All right, great. Yeah, because especially with New England IPA, those things will stay all overnight on you, right? Get some oxygen in there.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I
I
appreciate
think the
you.
paranoia on that front has been less about faucets and more about ingress through lines, since we don't tend to go through kegs that quickly.
So like oxygen getting into the beer through the beer line.
Right.
So once again, vinyl that will it's a permeable line, so you can actually get flavors through it. We had an account that they're like, all of our beer tastes like mold. Why is it taste like mold?
Oh.
And it's because their cooler was a wine cellar filled with wine, like incredibly beautiful wine. It's meant to be a wine cellar, but then they had like a 4-tap system also in the room, because they're like, this is the coldest room in the building. We're just going to put it in here. It's cold enough, right? But everything in there was vinyl. So the flavor of just the must of the room went into the actual lines. And so all their beer just tasted like mold. There was like a bunch of people reporting that their like beer was tasting like meat, from like a lot of restaurants will cure salami and stuff like that in the beer cooler, where they'll actually hang meat to like just hang out. And yeah, so it's like just hanging about, doing its meat stuff. And like just if you have vinyl, it can permeate through the line. So for that, the permeation stuff, even the Elton James has a little bit of permeation. It's just the type of tubing. If you're super, super concerned about it, dual barrier is the only way to go. Yeah, dual barrier is, that's what, like the trunk lines that go from the cooler to the bar, those are all dual barrier. So the lines in of them, they have basically, it's essentially 2 tubes, in one that they mold together. And those, the permeation level is like 0.000000001 or whatever. But with those, you don't have to worry about anything like that. But
those are like the trunk lines with like glycol loops and stuff built into them.
Exactly. Yeah. So because obviously, like, it's funny because the glycol lines in those trunks, those have permeation levels. So like technically the glycol particles could float through the tubing, but all the tubes that surround it are not permeable, so they don't pick up that that flavor.
Have you done anything with like duotite and like EVA barrier tubings, like the push-in fittings?
So like a push to connect fitting?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we use those a lot. They save so much fucking time. That's great. We use John Guest. They're actually the ones that started it. Yeah, John Guest is like the main company, and then others have like kind of pulled off their design. So yeah, we buy our stuff from, I think it's Fresh Water Supplies. It's like a hydroponics company. But yeah, the John Guest stuff is great. It doesn't it's inert, so it doesn't pick anything up. It doesn't corrode or anything like that. So it should be just fine as long as you're not doing like cocktails or anything like that. But yeah, just beer, all the push to connect fittings are great. Yeah, especially if you're using dual barrier, because those lines, those tubes, you can just push right into them. So for like an install, it makes installs a breeze.
Thank you.
You're doing a bunch of sour beers. Do you recommend like dedicating those lines to sour beers, or should you be able to clean it and move on to the next beer?
That's once again just depends on your materials. If it's vinyl, yes, you got to dedicate. If you have brass components, you got to dedicate. If you're all 304 stainless and, you know, either dual barrier or the Elton James tubing, that stuff comes clean, you know, like the Trillium install that we did. The whole idea of that install was they actually have 3 separate coolers so they can change the temperatures of those coolers. And we made the system so it is modular. So if they wanted to have all sour beers across the whole entire system, they can kick the temp up on all the coolers, change the glycol units to reflect that, and the system can handle it. So they were able to do that for like the Cantillon day that they did. And then the next day, they go back to regular service and they have all their IPAs and stuff like that. And none of them are infected or anything like that. Just because the tubing that we install with is super hygienic and it doesn't latch on to any of those flavors.
So kind of going off of that, I don't know, I think a lot of people know this with New England IPAs where the lines seem to get like stained, like a yellowish color.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an indication of like that line needs to be cleaned sooner, or is that just kind of par for the course with New England IPAs being that hazier yellowish orange color?
So it's funny because because New England IPAs are not really well documented of like, how do you get your haze? Is it particulate or is it through biotransformation? You know, like if it's a particulate thing, that discoloration is probably due to the particulate. And like we've noticed like a lot of these like super tiny breweries that are opening up that are home brewers that are trying to become pro, and like we, you know, totally support that and love it. And we install a lot of systems for those guys. When we go to do like, oh, you know, we're getting really busy and we want to expand, we go to like expand the draft system and we see their stuff, and it's like some of that, the New England IPAs or like even like the fruit gozas and stuff, there's just so much particulate, and it's that particulate that just sits in there, and it seems to like really like change the color of the equipment. Like you guys don't have to worry about this stuff, but there's a piece of equipment called a fob that most draft systems at restaurants have. And yeah, like some of these guys, they got like, they even permeate that, like, and I'm just like, what the hell? Like, how is your fob orange right now? Like, I don't understand. And I really do believe this. I mean, this isn't a hard science. This is my personal belief. But if you're not getting haze through biotransformation and you're getting it through just straight particulate, I think that's going to permeate your lines quicker, just because there's solids, you know, in your beer, or you know, there's things in there besides just the liquid that is causing your haze. Like if you can't bottle something, let it sit for 2 weeks and then pour it out, if the beginning of that beer is clear and the end of it is not, you know, that's when I start to have problem with hazy beers. As I'm a draft technician, you know, like the hazy beer game is, you know, my worst nightmare. It's, you know, like it makes my job a hell of a lot harder. And so yeah, like if you're just getting haze just from stuff being in the beer, I definitely think you should probably clean more often, just to try to prevent it. But honestly, the best test is just tap a keg of water and run it into a glass, taste the water. If the water tastes bad, or if it has any form of flavors outside of your tap, you know, then you know that there's something going on in the lines. Like we have to do that with like super big warning: don't do watermelon extracts, don't do mint extracts. Like if you do watermelon, like actual fruit, it's super weird, but watermelon fruit is totally okay to like puree and put that into the beer. But if you use an extract, it will permeate your lines, and your beers will always just taste like watermelon. And so like we developed a cleaner to get rid of that flavor. What it does is it literally, the chemicals are so strong that it strips away the outermost layer of the tubing and gets rid of those flavors. And obviously you don't want to do that a bunch of times, because eventually you'll just deteriorate your fucking draft system. But you know, some bars, they accidentally buy, or I mean, they don't accidentally, they buy the beer on purpose, but they don't know the ramifications of buying the beer. And so we've been able to find a way to kind of, you know, recover the system. But yeah, you know, like, yeah, if you got big old chunkies in your beer, it's not good. I don't know.
At our level, so you've been mentioning a bunch of cleaners that you guys develop for yourselves, but like for what we do, like what cleaners would you recommend, and what tempo would you like, or what process would you recommend? Like, I'm going to clean my kegerator tomorrow. What should I use and how should I do it?
So I know you guys use PBW a lot. That's like a pretty standard for homebrewers. That stuff for you guys is great. Use it. Like, especially if you have a family and there's like kids around and stuff like that, like PBW is great, because caustic or like sodium hydroxide, that stuff can literally kill people. So like PBW is basically a caustic cleaner for beginners. Like a caustic cleaner will literally eat your skin. So, you know, that's where we kind of occupy the space, where we only use sodium hydroxide for all of our cleans. But we also have to clean really old systems, or like really like neglected systems, where you have complete control of everything. So PBW is great. It works fine. You know, it's not a insufficient cleaner. Like if you felt like your system wasn't getting clean enough, you know, you could upgrade to caustic, and it's, as long as you're not being an idiot, caustic is safe. You know, as long as you always put, you know, caustic into water. You don't put water into caustic, because you could splash the chemicals or anything like that, or making sure that your chemical is in a locked container. That way no one else can get into it. Because like I said, like if you've seen Fight Club, when he does like the little hand thing that he does, that's sodium hydroxide. That's literally a caustic cleaner. That's what we use. Yeah, like it's super dangerous, and if you're not careful, it can seriously hurt you. But like I said, PBW for your guys' level, like the amount of space that you have to clean isn't anything crazy. And like a lot of professional brewers even use PBW as just like a safe sanitizer that they just have in the brewery, where they could throw tricon fittings and stuff like that in, you know, because you can stick your hand in and you're not going to burn your hand off. And so like that, yeah, if you guys are using PBW, that's totally okay and totally fine.
What about like BLC? Is that a caustic?
You do want it at
BLC? I can pull that up. It's funny. So I started off in the company as a cleaning tech, but now I just do installs. So I've kind of lost my like constantly looking up cleaning stuff. But yeah, if you want, I can pull it up, and then I can also talk to Alpha Chemical, who's it's a giant chemical plant, and I can talk to him about it as well. To
I think
see
Ross
what
has
his opinions are.
Ross, you're muted.
So I got some here. It's actually a sodium hydroxide solution. So it looks like it's like a diluted down version of lye. So this is the BLC, which is a sodium hydroxide solution. I don't know what percentage it's at, but that's what it says in the bottom.
Yeah, so I mean, if it's an alkaline cleaner, like that's what you're kind of looking for.
Yeah, it's a 2% caustic solution versus like straight lye, which will Fight Club your hand off. Quick question on you mentioned stainless steel a lot. What are your feelings about chrome plated stuff? Because I know a lot of like shanks and taps can be chrome plated and cheaper. And is there any consideration if we've gone that route for what we should or shouldn't use for cleaning?
If you have chrome plated brass, it is still brass. The chrome plating will wear off. Beer is acidic, and eventually it will just eat away the chrome plating. That being said, once again, if you're doing your proper maintenance, if you're doing it every 2 weeks and you're keeping it good, you can have those materials for, a year or two, and then you're totally fine. But that's the thing is, brass, vinyl, it needs to be replaced more often than stainless. Stainless is stainless forever. It's totally a long-term solution. You can have a stainless faucet forever until you decide, this faucet has gotten a little scuffed up. Maybe someone who is pouring beers is touching the glass against the faucet too many times, and there's a little scuff mark, and I want to get rid of this faucet. But other than that, like, stainless is perfect. It's a fantastic material to work with. That's why all the brewing equipment is all stainless, and professional breweries, because these things cost thousands and thousands of dollars, and if they couldn't have it forever, that'd be a serious issue. So even with the chrome plated stuff, like, once you see the chrome plating starting to flake, because that's what it does, is it starts to just flake off. At that point, you're probably going to want to start looking into replacing it. But yeah, if you're doing your regular maintenance, as long as you're not getting off flavors, that's the thing, is like, what's the worst thing from a dirty draft system? It's off flavors and a really bad hangover. So, you're not going to die from having a draft system that's dirty. It's a blessing and a curse. Like, the reason line cleaning isn't regulated how it should be is because it doesn't kill people if you don't maintain your draft system. It just makes the beer taste bad, and it gives you a hangover, like a really bad hangover. And that's the only thing. So if you're happy with how your beer tastes, and if you had one pint and you don't have a hangover the next day, your system's probably going to be okay. But if you're starting to get those off flavors, or you notice that you're like, man, I really didn't have that many beers last night, why am I feeling like total garbage? It's probably because you have microbes in your system that, it's like, if you drank a bottle of yeast, you'd feel like hell the next day. Like, and it's that same idea, is that there's just microbes that build up in the system, and you're basically drinking those microbes.
So for those of us who still have the vinyl lines and the plastic taps, economically speaking, wouldn't it be better for me just to like toss those out every 3 months, and instead of putting the money into, a dedicated tower and stainless steel tap?
Well, I mean, it kind of depends. How long do you plan on having beer at your house? How long do you have, plan on having draft system at your house? Because eventually it's going to win, like, eventually it's going to be more economically sound to have stainless, because I mean, especially now, stainless is a lot cheaper than it used to be. So like a stainless faucet versus a brass faucet, it's like $10-15 cheaper to have just a standard stainless faucet versus a standard brass faucet.
Oh yeah, I still have the plastic thing. I think a lot of us still do. We don't have the tower yet.
You take a quick look, and
like a picnic tap.
A picnic tap is like $4 or $5, and the low end of stainless is like $35 at the first website I thought to look at, which is not the cheapest.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like, yeah, I mean, you're saving, the $25 right there, but $25. So how many times do you have to replace the picnic tap? So if you replace it once a year, then after 4 years, it's worth having a stainless faucet. But then that means you need a kegerator, and obviously, a kegerator has its costs. And so there should be no shame in having plastic equipment or brass equipment or vinyl equipment or anything like that. There should be zero shame with any of that. What it is, are you maintaining it properly? And are you replacing it when it needs to be replaced, if it needs to be replaced? So with plastic equipment. If, you know, it's funny because actually plastic is technically more sanitary most of the cases than brass is, because most of the polymers that they use to make the plastic equipment is inert. So, you know, like the John Guest fittings that we use, those push connect fittings, those are all plastic. Those are all inert. Those will last forever. Like in the beginning of our company, we couldn't afford stainless panels for our hardware. So we actually used plastic panels because it's an inert surface. It's not going to rust. It's not going to get moldy or anything like that. It wipes clean. You know, with plastic, the thing you run into is that you can, if you like scratch the plastic, that becomes a point of nucleation. So as you're trying to like pour your beer, you could have foaming because it has a place to break out. So those are some of the drawbacks to plastic. But I mean, if you're rocking plastic and that's what works for your budget, and at the end of the day, the point is to fill and empty this glass, you know, and if it does that in a fashion that suits you, there's nothing wrong with it, you know, as long as you maintain it and clean it and replace it as is needed.
Also, I know in homebrewing, if you got this hobby to save money, it's probably the wrong hobby, right?
Yeah, but
Well,
I
I
think
don't know. I mean, isn't it cheaper eventually to homebrew than it is to buy beer, especially if it's like $24 a 4-pack now?
Nah,
That
not
is
the
a
way we homebrew
fantastic
beer.
myth. That is a fantastic myth there.
Yeah, Ross, why don't you lower your camera and show them your setup there, and we can
No,
talk.
I'm good. I'm good.
Hundreds and hundreds of dollars you spend on stainless kettles and friends. Yeah.
That's fine.
Hi, that's you can get the, if you want to do not replace the faucet, you can get the Pluto beer stainless beer gun. And
Dude, I was looking at it. That thing looks amazing. Yeah. Like, yeah, the Pluto stainless beer gun. I'm actually gonna buy one. I'm not even kidding. Like, I saw Doug sent me a bunch of questions that he was like, oh yeah, we're gonna ask you these. I was like, all right, cool. And I was like, Intertap, I've never even heard of these guys. And I looked it up, and yeah, in one of the videos he talks about the Pluto beer gun. I was like, what the fuck is this? And yeah, I looked it up. I'm buying one for sure. Like,
I got this is an air tap right here. This part just twists right off if I've got that on camera. So that just
your background.
Your damn virtual background's messing it up, Doug.
Oh, okay. But yeah, it just twists off and you can put accessories on it.
Yeah, no, I saw that. Which is once again, like, because you guys are doing homebrew, like the inner taps, those things are amazing. You know, like that's great. The fact that you can have a nitro faucet, a growler filler, or a regular faucet with the same faucet, that's awesome. You know, for a restaurant, that really doesn't really make sense for their business model, because most places up until 2 weeks ago weren't filling growlers. And, you know, like if you had a nitro beer, you had just a dedicated nitro line, you know? And that's the thing is, like, because your guys' systems are so modular, because they're so small, you can change the gases on your draft system really easily. Whereas like a restaurant, if they want to retool their system to have a gas that reflects the faucet type, they can't just throw on a nitro nozzle to their faucet, because that would require us to come in and retool their entire gas system, you know, for an entire cooler, just to have a nitro line that's irreplaceable, you know, or interchangeable.
I think you should get the tech companies to do the inner taps, and then you guys would have to come in every time. Minimum charge, you know.
No, I mean, our goal is to be as good to our customers as possible. We're not in it for the money per se. You know, we want to make a living, but the company actually started because the owners were like, Matty, he was a chef in Boston for 18 years and opened 6 restaurants, and then got tired of cooking, so he went front of house and started bartending. And he was just not happy with the service that was currently available, and he was just like, we need to make a company that provides an excellent service. So we try to inform people as much as possible, and if we did that, they would know that we're swindling them with those sweet nitro nozzles.
It's funny you mentioned about the gas systems. I had a buddy who he's moved jobs since, but he was working for a marketing company that did a lot of the marketing analysis for Guinness. And, you know, I didn't get too much in the details of it, but it was essentially like most bars have one nitro tap or one nitro tap only, and that's it. And so if they have a competitor come in, whether it be Murphy's or whatever else, like, you're out. It's not like, oh, we're going to add a different nitro. It's like we have one nitro beer, and it can play in their favor in that, like, you have one nitro tap, and how many nitro options do you have? So it's going to be Guinness. And it cannot play in your favor if there's competitors, but it's interesting that you mentioned that because it makes sense of kind of maybe where the Guinness stickiness comes in, where you see it everywhere.
Yeah. Well, so it not only is it the gas blend with Guinness, but they get you with a faucet and a coupler. So the coupler is specifically only fits Guinness kegs, and their faucet has a built-in tap handle that you cannot remove and still use the faucet. So they come in, they're like, hey, you buy a keg, we'll throw on this faucet, we'll give you the coupler for free. But then the salesperson goes away, and they're not going to replace the faucet, and they're not going to replace the coupler when you decide to buy something else. So you're stuck with a coupler that only works on their kegs and a faucet that is only branded for their beer. Anchor Steam does the same thing. Their kegs have a specific Anchor, not Anchor Steam. Anchor Steam's a beer, not a brewery. Anchor, their kegs have a specific coupler that only works with their kegs. So when they get you on the hook on a line, they're like, oh yeah, we're going to sell you this keg. We'll sell you this, you know, we'll give you the tapping equipment, and then boom, you're stuck. You're stuck with them because most bars are super lazy. They just want to make the money. So they're like, oh, I got to change the coupler. Oh, it's only 2 hex nuts. This change will literally take me 10 seconds. That's a lot of work. I'm just going to keep Anchor on. And like, that's how they get stuck with a brewery.
On a completely selfish note, how do I get my hand on some of your restrictables there? Because I do a lot of Hefeweizen, and I don't have dedicated Hefeweizen line. So how can I get those spare Perlick balls you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, we have a shit ton of them. If I can't, I'll talk to Chris and Maddie. If we can't just give it to you, we can sell it to you. It's super cheap. But yeah, if you ask Doug for my email, and just shoot me an email for a follow-up, and yeah, I'll probably be able to answer it within like Tuesday, Wednesday. But yeah, it's awesome because you could literally you could build the stick out to the restriction that you need and just keep that, and then just you splice that into your tubing, and then you're fine. And then when you don't need it, you just pull it out and then splice that tubing back together, and then you're fine. So yeah, for you guys, it's great. I wish a shit ton of restaurants had keg graders. So whenever they have problems with foamy beer, I could just throw in the restrictor kit and not worry about it.
Awesome. No, it sounded cool. I'm super excited to hear about that. So I figured I'd hit you up.
Yeah. But once again, if you have a lot of particulate in the beer that you're tapping in, it will be a problem.
Fair.
You mentioned another possible question. So you mentioned particulate. You've mentioned a couple of flavor extracts that are kind of terrible. What are your other sort of draft system flavor or style bugaboos?
Sorry, I had the fucking pots ran out of battery, so I've been swapping them out. So can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so flavors that will totally destroy your lines, probably not flavors that you guys are interested in putting on, but spicy beer, that will tank your lines. That stuff does not come out. It's very not fun. Yeah,
definitely had beers. There's like, oh look, someone had winter warmer on this line.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, is like the heavily spiced, like if you're adding, it's the adjunct beers that you worry about. Like if you're getting all your flavors from hot malt, yeast, and water, there's nothing to worry about. All that stuff is totally good. it's when you start adding stuff to your beer, that's when it becomes an issue. But the main players were, for a while, spicy beer was like a fad that came in and went, and it did not go quick enough because it messed up a lot of people's draft systems. And or mint is a big one. People were making like mojito beers and stuff like that. So mint extract or actual mint will just period ruin your line. When you're working with extracts, it will actually more likely, with any flavor, if you're working with an extract of a fruit or anything like that, it will more likely permeate the line than the actual fruit. So like, once again, we had 2 breweries. One of them used watermelon extract. One of them used actual watermelon. The one that used actual watermelon it's with watermelon, that's the only opposite. Actual watermelon permeates the line. It's the extract that doesn't, because higher hell watermelon from 21st Amendment does not permeate lines, but actual watermelon in other breweries' beers did permeate the lines. With everyone else, it's the opposite. It's when you start messing with the extracts, because it's basically a concentrate version of a flavor. And so, but I mean, peanut butter, that's another thing that we personally worry about, more so on an allergy reason. So like if a restaurant taps a peanut butter beer or an oyster stout or something like that, and they don't clean their lines, and then they just tap another beer because they're just like, oh, we had this beer on, we had a stout on, and I'll just throw in the next stout. This one doesn't have peanut butter in it, but it's just a stout. Well, it's like, well, shit, there's probably peanut oil in that stout, so that's something that people need to be worried about. And like, that's where we're trying to like push information, because there should be legislation. Like, if you make a beer that has peanuts in it, like, there has to be warnings when people buy it. They need to know, like, because someone could fucking die just because you thought it was sell better if you put peanut butter in your beer. Like that's insane. Like, is it really worth that risk? And that's where like the whole like adjunct thing that's happening right now is like super terrifying, because so many people are allergic to all kinds of stuff. And it's just like, and you're just doing it to have some freaking hot words on the side of your can.
So how do you deal with like, Trillium's got, they got a lot of adjunct heavy stouts. They got a lot of hazy IPAs. They got super thick fruit beers. They got, I mean, it's like, it seems like that would be a nightmare.
So Trillium is our best customer because they are constantly, they constantly push the grounds of like what is possible and what they want. And so they've actually allowed us, or forced us, however you want to see it, to learn a lot of shit, because they're just like, yeah, we're gonna pour a 4-volume beer at 60 or at 54 degrees. Like, figure it out. Like, I don't care how it works, just make it work, or like, hey, we have this crazy sour that's heavily fruited, and maybe some of our draft accounts have problems with that flavor staining their lines. So how do we get rid of that flavor stain to kind of save our name? And in that case, we work with a chemical provider to create a chemical that allows us to remove that flavor. And so it's everything is okay. It's just what you do after you do the thing that you've done to make sure that it is actually okay. Like peanuts in beer, totally okay, but you better fucking clean that shit properly before you serve people with another beer, because that's someone's life. Or if beer is so goddamn expensive now that if I buy a 12-ounce pour that cost me $10, that beer better taste like the beer I freaking ordered. And like, if the keg before it had some crazy extract in it that you've never you didn't test it. Like, you just brewed with it and then sold it to a bunch of people. You didn't do long-term testing on it, because that takes money and that takes time, and we're all trying to just make a bunch of money. So, you know, we're just going to send the kegs out. And so, you know, it's crazy. It's tough. Like, we had a bar. They're like, oh, we got the first barrel aged keg from this brewery. Like, they literally barreled it the morning of. They brought it to the place and they tapped it. And what happened was they kegged straight off the barrel of, like, the barrel that the beer came out of. And so when you barrel age beer, the inside of the barrel starts to, like, create a lot of particulate and stuff. And the OD, or the ID of the tubing that they used to actually keg off of the barrel, was big enough to let the barrel particulate into the keg. So they, you know, get the 6-0 to the bar, they tap the keg, and it basically looked like brownie batter got shot into the draft system, because it was just like this mushy barrel stout, like literally like wood particulate went into the draft system and like clogged the draft system. And like, so we had to do some fucking, you know, some spelunking. You know, but yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of being, there's an answer to everything. It's just, what does the answer cost sometimes? Like, it really, sometimes it's just like, are you willing to pay for the answer?
So Shane, the fobs, you mentioned fobs.
Mm-hmm.
Were fobs not prevalent in the US up to recently? Or, like, I've seen many people pouring off pitchers of beer between kegs. Like, are fobs in America, or are they?
So it's funny, because most people who have fobs on their system don't know how to use them. Like, it's insane. Like, so when we do an install, I give a class to the customer, and I don't care if they're the world's best bartender or not. I tell them the exact same information as if they were day one. And we'll do classes for restaurants that are already open and stuff like that, and they just want us to come in to do a class just cause. And what we've even done is, like, we'll go to one person and be like, how do you reset a fob? I'm not telling you, you tell me, how do you reset a fob? And they say it. And then you go to the next person, you go, how do you reset a fob? And they say the exact same thing with one step different. And then you go to the next person and they do the same thing. And then you go, you're all wrong. None of you guys know how to use this thing. And by the way, there's literally a flyer, like, fastened to the wall of the cooler that tells you step by step how to use this thing. You just don't want to read the sign. So it's not necessarily that the fobs aren't something that a lot of systems have. It's just that a lot of people don't really pay attention enough to use them properly. Every system that we install has a fob, even if it's direct draw, because for direct draw purposes, it's not really about the money saving, but it's more of the, like, we call it like the magic. So, like, you're pouring a beer, the keg kicks, and then the faucet just stops pouring, because we think that splatter, one, it looks like shit. And, like, you're at a bar, you're spending, you know, $10 for a 12-ounce pour or whatever, and you're pouring, and you see, like, splatter, and it kicks off, and it gets the bartender all messy, and it gets everything all messy. But that's the thing, is, like, when that beer splashes everywhere, they can, like, wipe it down and stuff like that, but it's probably going to get in places that aren't really accessible.
Yeah.
And so it's going to start, like, deteriorating the bar top, or it's a great source for fruit flies, or, you know, so it's, for us, even direct draw systems, we put fobs on them because we don't want that interaction to happen, where you're at a bar and you're pouring a pint and it's, you know, you're so close to finishing, and then just go boom, and it kills it, and you just wasted an entire pint. That beer goes everywhere. The bartender's pissed off because they are now covered in beer, and it makes everyone's day less ideal.
It stands for foam on beer, right? So as soon as a keg is about to kick, it is a mechanism that senses foam or something, and then it stops.
Yeah. So what it is
pouring.
it's essentially it's a sight glass that has a buoy inside of it. So the inlet goes all the way to the top of the sight glass, but the outlet is on the bottom. So what happens is when the gas goes in, it goes to the top, and then it actually compresses that buoy down, which seals the bottom. So it makes it so the sight glass has gas in it, but that gas never enters the system. And it also has like a little vent on the side that you can vent all that gas out. So ideally what happens, the keg kicks, the buoy drops, the gas is on the top. You come in, you swap the kegs out, you vent out all the gas, and then at that point, there's a little lever on the top that you can reset the fob. And so what happens is the buoy raises and allows you to pour the beer. Very important is to reset the fob, and whatever the mechanism is, you have to reset it before continue pouring beer. A lot of people, you know, they're in the middle of service, they're panicking or whatever, they got, you know, line down the street. And so they go in, they get the keg to go, but then they forget to do that last part. And what happens is the next time a keg kicks, they get the gas, you know, because the gas just goes straight through the system because that buoy didn't drop.
Quick question on that.
Standard for installs, like for years in America, or not? Because I did all my bartending in Ireland in the 90s, and every bar had a fob basically.
I think they all do here too.
It's just
Don't they?
improper use then.
So with, it's funny. So in England, Ireland, draft systems are a hell of a lot better than in America, and it sucks that that's the case. Not for them, but for me, because obviously we want to have a certain level of what is done. But yeah, the like European draft systems and like what European bartenders are used to are, it's like such a higher level, I feel like, with like at least like the respect of the draft system, not necessarily like the tending of bar, but like the draft system itself. Like I was fortunate enough to go to Cloudwater has a beer festival now called Friends and Family, and so they have the setup for the festival, and a lot of the breweries there are actually U.S. brewers. So in Europe, they have the dual barrier, the hard line, throughout the entire system, even to the coupler and everything. It's hard line the whole entire time. Whereas in America, we have a lot of places have vinyl or the silicone based stuff. It's like a soft tubing, so it's more flexible. So you have more, the operator has more say of what happens. Where in Europe, they have the dual barrier all the way to the coupler. So there's only so much maneuverability that you have, because that line can kink. But that line is way more sanitary than anything that we install here. But because bartenders and stuff like that can't handle the idea of, when I change a keg, I need to be very precise and very like conscious of what I'm doing so that I don't kink this line. Whereas they're used to it being super flexible, so they can just like throw a keg on real quick, get back up to the bar and start slinging pints. Whereas like in Europe, it's more of like a methodical thing. Like there's a landlord, you know, like there's someone who is dedicated to just the tapping of beer, you know, and like it's like a prestigious thing. Or like in Europe, or like in like Germany and stuff like that, you have like the brewster, who's like, there is a title, there's just a person who's like, this is what I do, I'm the fucking person who taps kegs, and guess what, I'm the fucking best at it, and I make sure that it's all done right. And but in the United States, it's kind of just like, hey, you pour beer, you got to change kegs too. Like it's not seen as like a prestigious thing. It's like anyone taps the kegs. The guy who busts the table also taps the kegs. So it's like, that's where US versus Europe is a little bit different. Whereas like, I feel like in Europe, it's more of like I am the person who takes care of the system. Whereas out here, it's like the system makes us money. And if it doesn't make us money, then fuck it. We just get rid of it, you know?
On that, so it made me think, just you describing that, and the fact that bars go from keg to keg. It's like, hey, sorry, Trillium is crazy fruited beer that makes the tap stink just kicked. We're going to throw on this Hellas. Do you guys run into issues, or are there things bars or brewers should consider about certain beers that basically need to have like a buffer between, like when that keg kicks, that peanut buttery beer kicks, that crazy fruited beer kicks, that tap is dead for the night until it gets cleaned?
So there's two ways of thought of this. There's the correct way and the awesomely incorrect way. The correct way is the line just gets retired for the night and someone cleans it before the next keg gets tapped. That's the proper way. The awesomely incorrect way is say you spent, so these beers that they get are incredibly expensive, like $300-400 for like a half barrel. Okay, so you're spending all this money on this like crazy fruited beer, like fruited IPA, whatever. Crazy, not so good way is what you can do is tap just like a whatever IPA on after it. And because the line is permeated with crazy fruit flavors, you can now sell said second IPA that's basically getting randled through a permeated line. And so like most people don't do this, but it's in my head, I'm like, oh my God, this would be awesome and hilarious. Because like the customer is educated, but they're not at the same time. Whereas like if you handed them that pint, they'd be like, wow, this tastes amazing. And then they just don't care. And like, versus like, it's not what it's supposed to be, but like we had a client that luckily super stand-up guy, he had a crazy fruited IPA that permeated his lines because he has an older system. And he wanted us to get rid of that flavor. And he's just like, but to be honest, like my backup keg of like the next beer tastes amazing on this line that's fucked up, but that's not what the beer tastes like. And he wants to maintain the respect for the brewery and for himself. So he was like, no, we're gonna get this flavor out. But he's like, but to be honest, I definitely had a pint of that, like just fucked up because it tastes great, you know? And like, so there's some people get away with it where they'll just throw another keg on. Some people are really adamant about like, hey, like I want to get this thing off. I mean, it's the problem is that no one makes one beer a shit ton now. Everyone is just making 100 different beers. So like the tap list is like, oh, here's another stout, but I've never had that stout before because they do a rotation stout program where they never make the same stout twice. So like, I don't know what that actually tastes like before I order it. And if it tastes good and there's a slight peanut butter flavor because the last beer had peanut butter, it's like, well, you don't really know because you've never had that beer before, you know? Whereas like before, and like, you know, like before beer got super crazy, it's people had 6-7 beers that they always did with a seasonal, you know, and stuff like that. It's like, we all know what Sierra Nevada Celebration tastes like, right? So if they tapped a keg of Sierra Nevada right after Crazy Fruit IPA, any of us would be able to be like, yo, that's not the beer, like what the fuck's happening? But with the new beers that are happening, people don't make the same thing all the time. And so it becomes more relaxed, and because bars don't just carry the same beer all the time and they're constantly turning it over, once again, it's all super relaxed, and you know, the customer really doesn't know. And if they've had 2-3 pints, they definitely don't know, you know.
When you were talking earlier about types of beer whose flavors can permanently permeate the lines, are smoked beers included in that?
So that we haven't ran into as much with like a smoked permeation. And I think that's just because it's a smoked malt, whereas it's not smoked extracts. And I was saying at one point, whereas it's like if you get your flavors from hot malt, yeast, and water, like there's no real permeation because the flavors are there and like they may seem strong, but extracts are just really strong. Where it's like if you had a smoked extract, then you might run into that problem. Like I'd be curious to like a smoked extract beer. Like I'd be curious to see if that would permeate a line versus actual smoked malts.
I say, Ramsey, have you ever had issues with your lines and your smoked beers? See if Ramsey's on here or not.
Yep, he's
Ramsey
coming.
only
I
has
don't think
smoked
so.
beers though, so he would never notice if it got permeated.
Well, I don't know, but as far as I can tell, no. I haven't had a smoke problem in non-smoked beers.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. That's the whole game is what does the beer taste like at the end of the day, right? Like all form of maintenance, all form of materials. It's all just what does the beer taste like in the glass? Like if it tastes how it was supposed to, then you're good. If it doesn't, obviously there's some part of the process that needs to be tooled.
How about ciders? Anything interesting different happen in ciders as far as you guys know?
Ciders require 304 stainless. If you don't, you can get a egg, like a sulfur, like egg flavor. But I mean, there's nothing really new as far as like the same flavor staining stuff that happens in beer can happen in cider. The main thing with cider is that you have to have 304 stainless.
All right, this is great. Thank you so much, Shane. We'll wrap this up. I appreciate all your time.
One final question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, DT.
All right, so you've done Notch, you've done Trillium. I mean, you got the long ass list. Did you have a favorite system to design that really like challenged you guys? That you kind of look at it as like that's the one that was amazing.
What should we look out for?
I mean, Trillium Canton is definitely the most like awesome system that we've designed. But there's been like other systems that are like holy shit. If you've been to Banners Tap and Kitchen, it's like a new super high-end sports bar connected to TD Garden. That system was pretty gnarly.
Massive TV.
Yeah, they're the biggest TV in New England. But yeah, the draft system, I think it's 72 faucets, 56 beers. The cooler layout was insane. Some of the beers feed to 4 faucets. So it's like, as far as like a non-temperature related aspect, like, I mean, it's just the biggest system. We had the least amount of control when it came to actually installing because such a large construction site. So it's a union construction site. So we were the only non-union people on the job site, which provides a lot of challenges because like for every person I have on site, there has to be 2 union people assisting us. And if they're not working, we get in trouble. So we have to have them actually do stuff. And so the fact that that system doesn't pour foam is incredibly awesome because like we had a trunk line get ran over by a forklift and like this was like the best part of this install. We go to test the glycol system and I'm down by the towers and I have my guy on the cooler turning on the units and I hear trickling behind me and I turn around and there's liquid pouring out of the wall behind the TV, the big fucking 70-foot TV that they have. And I'm just like, Tyler, turn off the glycol unit real quick. And he turns it off and the liquid stops coming out of the wall. And I'm just like, fuck, like we just leaked glycol onto the world, like the biggest TV in New England. And not only that,
it's the world. It's the fucking world, man. It's the biggest single pane TV I think in the world. Isn't that far?
But not only that, so below this place is a Starbucks, and so our lines run down into the Starbucks and into the Star Market, and then they come back up into the restaurant. So we flooded 12 gallons of glycol into Starbucks, Star Market, and Banners. And so I was freaking the fuck out. But then I realized that none of our connections are in the middle of the system. Our connections are at the front and the end, and it wasn't leaking out of the front or the end. It was leaking out of the middle. So what the hell happened? And it turns out an electrician hit our lines with a sawzall and didn't tell anybody. And so there's a giant section of our lines just missing in the trunk. And so they had to open up a finished wall, and so that we could do surgery on a trunk line. But yeah, like I said, the fact that that system pours beer and it pours beer great is like just beyond me because of stuff like that the whole time. And
I had a beer there, one beer, because it was like fucking $12, but I had a beer there and it poured beautifully.
Thanks. Yeah, the beer there is incredibly expensive, but it's a hell of a good ambiance to be drinking beer in. And they'll blowtorch your bacon at the table. So that's what you're really paying for.
All right, DT, any last questions like you had? That was a good one, though. A really good one, actually.
No, I mean, I think I'm good.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank Shane.
Yeah.
Great presentation.
Yeah.
I mean, if anybody wants to stay on and tell horror stories or drink more beers, feel free.
Yeah, I gotta get going. But if you guys want, yeah, we're on Instagram at Modern Draught. Like I said, we do the Sunday Funk Day thing. Yeah, and that's
Thanks so much for hooking us
Thanks,
up
Shane.
with this
Appreciate
talk.
it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you guys ever have questions, just hit us up. Let us know.
Yeah, he was going to come judge with us too at the Boston Homebrew competition. Well, NHC. Yeah, so we appreciate those efforts. Yep, next year.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
All right.
All right. Cheers, Shane. Thank you.